So thanks for the kind introduction. Thanks for the invitation to Felix Levin, of course, Professor Dr. Ruth Hagenhuber. What I want to do today is, as Felix already pointed out, is not my current main occupation. Currently, I'm mainly addressing different topics in science diplomacy, especially I was on an advisory board for the EU Commission on regarding science diplomacy advice in a broader space, and this is so to say my main occupation now. But as I will present you a new and a kind of in the works research project, I'm really looking forward for your feedback, for your criticism, how harsh it may be, and I hope I don't take too much of your time. So what I want to do today is I want to ask some questions. I want to ask, is the concept of petro-masculinity, and I will expand on that if you don't know that already, if the concept of petro-masculinity a good starting point for a broader approach to address techno-masculinities. What I want to do is expand the sources and the methods of Cara Daggett's well-known paper on petro-masculinities and also her concept, and try to find a pathway from the focus of energy resources to a broader analysis of technology, especially regarding the interdependence of authoritarianism, masculinity, and technology. So, could this help to further analyze the widespread reluctance towards a sustainable mode of production? This would be my question. And also, could we find a kind of built-in prevalence for authoritarianism regarding technology-based frameworks, so to say. So I want to start with Cara Daggett's work on petro-masculinity first. I won't give you the whole picture of the whole paper and her work due to time issues, but I want to give you the key components. Cara Daggett published her paper on petro-masculinity in 2018. It is well known. It was very well discussed. It also had a huge impact in Germany. What you see here is a book publication by a well-known publisher directly from the academic paper. And this doesn't happen often. The academic paper is translated into book form for a public market. Also, 1 year later, Daggett published her book, which is also expanding on her concepts in her paper on the birth of energy. So what did Cara Daggett address in her paper, Petro-masculinity, Fossil Fuels and Authoritarian Desires? She recognized, and I think this is something we all recognize, a huge overlap between the ideas of fossil fuel or a fossil fuel-driven economy with authoritarian movements, authoritarian viewpoints, and different points of conservatism and also masculinities. So what we can now see that different authoritarian movements in the whole world heavily regard on a kind of climate denial, but this is sometimes diverse. Sometimes that climate change won't happen. Some say it does happen, but we can't do anything. Some say it's happened, but it's natural, and so on. You all know the arguments, but it's also a refusal, explicit refusal, a rejection of a kind of turn to renewable energy. And this is in the face of crisis, in the face of existential crisis of the world. This is something very significant. What Cara Daggett did is she mainly addressed the current situation at the time in the US. So Donald Trump, which is a topic again, and also, of course, and also movements like the Proud Boys and how they deal with the idea of a petro-masculinity. She used two main sources, in my opinion, for her analysis. One is the studies from the 50s on the authoritarian personality, mainly conducted by the migrant members of the Frankfurt School, the critical theory, and also by American sociologists and psychologists. And she also focused on the pre-studies which were conducted not only, but mainly by Erich Fromm and his work on authoritarianism in society. The other main source is Klaus Theweleit's work on male fantasies. Klaus Theweleit is a German scientist. He wrote his book and it's enormous. So I got the German version here. It has 2 values and it has 1,300 pages. An analysis of the proto-fascist movement in the Weimar Republic. And he tried to analyze their views on masculinity, on their bodies, on their selves, and on authoritarianism. And it is in this case important that she regards, I think, exclusively to the first volume. Here's the outcome. Analyzing petro-masculinity alerts us to those perilous moments when challenge to fossil-fueled systems and more broadly to fossil-soaked lifestyles become interpreted as challenges to white patriarchal rule. So there's an identification between fossil-fueled the fossil-fueled economy, and I would not exclusively say white. This is what we are seeing right now. It's not exclusively white anymore, but male and therefore patriarchal rule. So how can we come from this focus of the energy production to technology itself, the use of technology itself? As I said, I want to follow Daggett in her approach. So I want to also use the study of authoritarian personality, but with the work of Else Frenkel-Brunswick. Despite the notion that the critical theory was exclusively men and anti-feminist, they had a lot of female contributors to their studies, mainly Else Frenkel-Brunswick, who did psychoanalysis. She was a cornerstone of this study in authoritarian personality and an equal researcher to, for example, Adorno. Interestingly, in the German version of the authoritarian personality, all her work is excluded. You can only have this in the English version. She also conducted the clinical study, so the interviews with the people they use for the study. Another resource I want to use is the second volume of Klaus Theweleit's book on male fantasies, because there he analyzes the trajectory of authoritarian movements towards and the ideology on technology. And this is one of my main sources for my project. So I want to go to Klaus Theweleit's work. As I said, it was written in the 70s, and it was a huge analysis of literature circulated and read by the so-called Freikorps movement. The Freikorps movement were veterans of the First World War, conservatives, right-wing veterans, who built militias, who roamed the streets of the Weimar Republic, and who were a cornerstone from the claim to power for the Nazi movement. I will use some terms he also uses, but I will also heavily use, and this is one of the influence Theweleit have on me, large quotes, because this is what he do. He largely quotes what actually was read. So what Theweleit says is that the fascist or the fascist personality and their trajectory, their ideas of war is not war as a kind of means to get something, means to get property, to get land, to defend the nation or something. But for the fascist mind, for the proto-fascist mind, war is an experience. And in war, and this is what he says, all machines are mobilized. And this is very interesting. He's already talking about machines. A war in which he experienced the fascist experience, the whole of his being and his future potential. So it may be in war that he becomes a man in the first place. So already machinery and male identity is hugely identified. One of the main sources was Ernst Jünger. You may have heard the name because Ernst Jünger is one of the, so to say, well-known German authors and philosophers. He was a World War I veteran. He worked mainly on the on nihilism, and he had mainly his so to say source was the works of Nietzsche, and he was a huge influence not only to the fascist movement but to the conservative movement at all. What he says, and this is very interesting, there is no means as such, and an unrelated mechanics is one of the prejudice invented by abstract thinking. I highlighted the abstract thinking. So what he says is, they are not tools by their own. They are not tools just to solve something. Tools have a higher meaning. And what we all might know what he means with abstract thinking. So there's the other, the Jewish identity especially. They have this idea just to use tools for, I don't know, doing a task. But there's a higher meaning that the intended other is excluding. So, and this is another quote from Jünger, the machine must be made more than a means of production to satisfy our pitiful basic needs. You see, it's not only production. We don't use machines to produce stuff to live. This is made too simple. This is not masculine at all. It should provide us with a higher and deeper satisfaction. This is also very interesting. It's not only coupling a kind of higher purpose for masculinity, but it with machinery, but it also should bring satisfaction. And I think this is very interesting because I think there are some trajectory that bring us to ideas, for example, from Haraway. And it does another thing. It shows us something that we also can recognize today. This idea that a man could only be a man in a kind of cyborg way, if we want to know, and then he fulfills his full satisfactory potential. So it's also about desire. It's about of wholesomeness and about, yeah, so to say, sexual desire. But why is Ernst Jünger so interesting for us? The one thing he did, and I took this quote from historian Herf, Reactionary Modernism. He named a book, an historical analysis of this. What Ernst Jünger did was he opened up the very, so to say, anti-technological, the so to say very backwarded, romanticizing, conservative right-wing proto-fascist movement, and brought them, and this is one of his biographers, already in 1934 said, the German youth has Ernst Jünger to thank for the fact that technology is no longer a problem for them. So technology now could be embraced by reactionary ideas. It doesn't have to be neglected anymore. And it is a cornerstone of becoming a real reactionary individual. Another thing that's very important just to mention for now is that Heidegger, the German philosopher, had a lot of contact to Ernst Jünger. There's a huge volume where they exchanged ideas, and he was also heavily, not only positively, he also criticized Jünger in some ideas, but he was also heavily influenced by Jünger's idea of technology. And what you see here, technology is now a metaphysical issue. This is more the German side of fascism, so to say, but there were other authoritarian traditions at this time. And one of this big authoritarian tradition was the futurism in Italy. And you might say, okay, futurism, that doesn't sound like very backwarded, like authoritarian, like conservative. Here's a Marinetti. Marinetti wrote in 1903 the so-called Manifeste du Futurisme. He published it in the Figaro in French, in the French newspaper Le Figaro, which was one of the most influential newspapers, also intellectual, in Europe at this time. In his manifest, he had 11 commandments for futurism. And I give you a kind of a best of here, what these futurists had in mind for the embracing of technology in society. I quote a bit: "We affirm that the world's magnificence has been enriched by a new beauty, the beauty of speed." So we already have ideas of accelerationism. Not only accelerationism actually by a fast vehicle, but also by accelerating society. And another thing, except in struggle, there is no more beauties. We had this idea of the fulfillment in war. No work without an aggressive character can be a masterpiece. Poetry must be conceived as a violent attack on unknown forces to reduce and prostrate them before men. You know, again, the unknown forces, the other. We will glorify war, and now I come to the end of the quote, and scorn for women. So it just throw in anti-feminism, so like it's essential for them. We will destroy the museum, libraries, academy, of every kind. We will fight moralism, feminism, and this was in 1903, and every opportunistic or utilitarian cowardice. This is something we still have today, or if you want, again, when there this notion of that society has to fight feminism, wokeness, and this all moralism. So I try to speed it up. I know I'm a bit short on time. I want to give you an example of futurism artistry. It was mainly an artist movement. This is from Giacomo Balla, a speeding automobile from 1912. So you see, this is not like Nazi art. This is very modern. This is cubistic. This has all the traits of a progressive art form, but it wasn't. Konrad Kunze, who wrote a tremendous book, unfortunately only in German, about the cultural history of highways of the Autobahn and how they are connected to manliness, masculinity, modernity, and nationalism. He kind of analyzed this futuristic appeal to machinery, to the early automobilization of society. And he had 5 essential topics for the futuristic movement. So they have a libidinal shift to new objects from females. They don't want anymore. They don't want to desire females anymore. They want to desire objects, machinery, a humanization and therefore eroticization of the machine. We see this, by the way, today with the whole idea of the sex robot, which is in nearly all forms a kind of male fantasy, a cis male fantasy, a connection with other reactionary projects. This is very important, including racism, nationalism, Bellicism, and imperialism, a symbolic representation and condensation of the entire program in a new brutalized masculinity, brutalizing not only towards the other, but also towards themselves, and the support of masculinity through external objects. So what now is important is my automobile, my uniform, also other entities like the nation, the leader, or and this is also very important, the terror against weaker individual or groups. So what Kunze points out is futurism lived from the borrowed power of technical progress, a progress not for the good of all, but for the genesis of a new misogynistic masculinity. So there's an essential identification. The essence of technology is this fulfillment of this misogynistic masculinity. To achieve this, machines and all above cars, which were in the center, futurism did also a lot about planes. Planes were also a huge, so to say, desired kind of machinery. To achieve this, machines and all above cars had to be anthropomorphized in order to be eroticized. Love, which was no longer intended for women, was shifted to fast machines in the realm of futuristic poetry. And this I just learned that and from his book. In Italy, the car changed its gender from male to female. So the futuristic movement started at the time where the car was gendered as male, the car, and we cannot do this in English correctly, but now became female gendered. So it's changed, the machine changed its gender, which is very interesting. And we also see now a kind of divergence of different approaches of authoritarian technology use. So we have, let's so to say, the more German approach with Ernst Jünger, where there's a lot of inclusion of desire. I don't want my pity desires, my pity eroticism, and so on. I want a fulfillment in war, being a cyborg warrior. And on the other side, the Italian-based eroticism of machinery. And I think they are not opposite. They are just two sides of exact the same coin. There are some more studies on the idea of this automobilization or the technologization of authoritarian movements. And from Daniele Zenone, she points out that the machine, which was seen as a woman, also fits in with the ideology of nationalism and its imperialistic claim to dominate and conquest, because the woman in this case was the other. It could also be the other nation. It could also be the colonial-sized country, the enslaved people. So it was a reclaim, so to say, via technology to power. Katja Pizzi, who wrote Italian Futurism and the Machine, also points out, and this is very close to the interpretation of the Frankfurt School, that Mariatti interweaves a cluster of racial, sexual, and political anxieties. And this is very, very interesting. So it's not of being strong, it's about the fear of the own weakness. All these anxieties should be solved by connecting to the machine, by becoming one with the machine. So what she says is, there's a macho bond. The machine reflects the physical domination of man over the environment. And I want to come to a kind of case study. Sasha Disco did a very interesting piece on the culture of motorcycling in the Weimar Republic. This is interesting because motorcycling in the early days was a very proletarian activity. Motorcycles were a mean of a kind of underprivileged people for individual mobility. So this motorcycling, in my hometown in Nuremberg in the early 20th century, we had countless backward garages where people built motorcycles on their own from scratch. People enhanced old bicycles with motors, and we had a huge amount of motorcycles in the city because this was an individualized proletarian way of transportation. He did a lot of research in, for example, journals, and there was a journal, the BMW Blätter, the BMW Papers, which was a kind of a fanzine for motorcycle enthusiasts at the time, because BMW didn't only produce cars but also motorcycles. And there was an interview with a motorcyclist called Ernst Henne, conducted by Armand Binder. I will quote this. Germany's best writer possessed the highest measure of human power to concentrate the necessary presence of mind. United with the machine, with which the man is intimately melted during such a performance, the racer does not submit without restraint to the machine. Instead, the feeling of power, which originates from overcoming resistance, masters the machine and leads to its augmented performance. So this was not only a thing of the close philosophical circles of the fascist or proto-fascist movement. This was also a perception of the whole society, how people who deal with machinery, especially athletes, were seen and what are they doing. And let us have a quick short look what become of this Germany's best writer later.
Der deutsche Kraftfahrsport kann erneut eine beachtenswerte Bestleistung aufweisen. Auf der Reichsautobahn bei Frankfurt am Main gelang es Ernst Henne, auf BMW hintereinander 12 neue Rekorde für Motorräder aufzustellen. Er erreichte dabei 280 Stundenkilometer.
So we see this idea of machinery, of speed, of becoming one. And you see in this machine, you could not even see the human anymore. Of this idea of becoming one was celebrated in the National Socialist system. It was celebrating in Italian fascism. It was also celebrating in other authoritarian movements, for example, in the Franco regime, and so on. So, and now I'm coming to the more or less to the end of my presentation. Sorry for taking so much time. I want to quickly point out the work of Else Frenkel Brunswick. As I said, she conducted the clinical studies, the interviews, which were the baseline for the analysis of the authoritarian personality. And she, as I said, she was a cornerstone of the analysis because she pointed out a very specific finding when they interviewed authoritarian or non-authoritarian people. And this is what she calls anti-ambiguity. Intolerance of emotional and cognitive ambiguity seems not only to be a characteristic of the personality, of the ethnical prejudice, so racism in a broader sense, but this would also include anti-Semitism in this case. It also appears as a part of the explicitly stated ego ideal of exponents of the Nazi ideology in professional psychology. So this unableness to live with something that is not right or wrong, that is not black or white, seems to have a huge impact of how you perceive the world and whatever's around it, especially towards yourself. So you want to be one, this ego ideal, what you mentioned, this wholesomeness, and everything that challenges it is a huge threat to the fascist personality. This ability, the inability on the part of typical high scorers, so the higher you score, the more you go towards authoritarian personality traits, to face ambivalence, which is emotional ambiguity, has been discussed previously, mainly in connection with the attitude towards parents and towards the other sex. In these and other areas, hostile emotions were found to have been repressed and hidden behind a facade of glorification. So what we already saw with the ideas of Marinetti, with the ideas of Jung. So this is from another work. To sum this up, there is more than an empirical affinity between the strength of hostility, of power orientation, of externalization, and of rigid stereotyping on the one hand, and the intolerance of ambiguity of the other. So this is an essential point. It's not of how sorry, big air quotes, how racist you are, how anti-Semitic you are, how misogynistic you are. The baseline for authoritarian thinking seems to be anti-ambiguity. And now, at the end of my presentation, I want to go a bit out on a stretch, and I'm awaiting your feedback on that. If anti-ambiguity is the cornerstone of authoritarian thinking, and we regard this to the use of technology, we find that essentially, especially modern digital technology, is based on the ideas of George Boole, as you know. George Boole in 1847 published his mathematical analysis of logic, and what he presented there is now known as the Boolean algebra, which you also know as digital thinking. So when you have any kind of computer, you have not an analog, but a digital processing, which means, and this is literally the states that I mentioned, you have true or false. There's nothing in between. You have 0 or 1. So there was already criticizing in this time about the potentials of early forms of AI or processing machines. And I want to bring in Ada Lovelace, who worked with Babbage on the difference machine and later analytical machine, or was introduced to the difference machine. And she already said in 1842, human intervention, is necessary first, for the machine is not a thinking being, but simply an automaton which acts according to the laws imposed upon it. And we see the laws above now. And thus, although it is not itself the being that reflects, it may yet be considered as the being which executes the conception of intelligence. So, when we imply a purely digital algorithm to any kind of technology, aren't we not implying essentially anti-ambiguity to every kind of technology? My idea would be that this could be a part of the explanation why technology today, not only fossil fuel, but technology, especially digital technology, and also which obviously includes AI, is so hard to challenge is so hard to deal with the current challenges of, for example, the climate change, poverty, mass migration, because the ambiguity may be needed to compute these challenges is not in the algorithm, and therefore it has a kind of prevalence to authoritarian use, and we see this in social media, we see that in the big solutionism. If we quote Morozov for a moment, we see that in people like Elon Musk, who made much of his money with electric cars, but is still authoritarian as it can be. So this would be my idea. I know this is a big stretch, so I'm happy to have your criticism. I got some points for discussion, including Judy Weissman's account, also something from Daggett, and last from Latour, we must care for our technology as we do for our children. Yeah, let's see. So thank you for your time. I know I'm much over the conducted thing, so thank you for your patience.